So a couple common objections. We don't need to change the Constitution, we just need them to follow the Constitution. And the next one, if they don't follow the Constitution now, why would they start following it after we enacted amendments? Well, both of these questions make an assumption that we're still operating under the 1787 Constitution. So the first question is the Constitution the problem? Well, in 1787, we had 4 beautiful parchments that gave us our government. That's not the Constitution we operate under today. After 230 some odd years of judicial review and 27 amendments to the Constitution, our current Constitution consists of 3,000 pages. That's the Constitution Congress is following. And if you ask them, they believe in their heart of hearts they're following this. They're not following our desires. They're not following what we want to see. They're following the Constitution as it has been rewritten since the beginning. So, will Congress ever pass an amendment to curtail their power? The federal government will never voluntarily do that, no matter who gets elected. If only one amendment manages to get passed, it would create more problems than it would solve. If the balanced budget amendment gets passed, all we're going to do is have increased taxes. If you don't also pass spending cuts, and then just cutting the budget isn't enough. Washington, at the bottom line, will never fix itself. Article 5 gives us the power to do that. Now, if they don't follow the Constitution now, why would they start following it after it is amended? Well, every modern amendment with current vernacular is followed. Where they play free and loose with the facts are on older amendments or older parts of the Constitution that had modern vernacular for 1787, but can be morphed into what they want today. So consider, taxes are still being collected. Women still have the right to vote. 18 and over still has the right to vote. D.C. still has its electors. It's still legal to drink alcohol. None of those amendments are being curtailed. Again, because they're written in a modern 20th century language that is very hard to misinterpret what they're stating. Understand that every word of the Constitution ultimately decides this. It is a matter between liberty and power. The government has 3,000 pages of power over us, and they have 18 tractor-trailer loads of federal regulations over us. That's the power. That's the government we're sitting under today. It's time for us to take our Constitution back. And our founding fathers knew this day was coming. They knew that they would become oppressive. They knew we would never get proper redress through the courts. They knew the only solution would be the ultimate check against an abusive federal government, our state legislatures. This is the most important issue that we face as a nation today. We are seriously at the cliff. I served my country, and I look at those who have gone before me. I've had too many friends draped in American flags. I understand that what they fight for every day that goes by, that we change the Constitution they died for, we mock their deaths. That's my passion. That's why I'm here fighting for Article 5. The current mangled Constitution, 1787, was the greatest governing document the world had ever seen. It was modified by amendments. The Bill of Rights created a new version, 27 amendments, created 27 new versions. It was modified by SCOTUS, starting with Mayberry versus Madison, 228 years of SCOTUS interpretations, SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States. That's what's happened to the Constitution we started with. SCOTUS is an ongoing amending convention every time they sit. That was never a vision for our founding fathers. They never intended for them to have that kind of power. Our key problem now is how to reverse the control of SCOTUS, how to reverse a Congress that refuses to do anything about an out-of-control SCOTUS. They won't even do anything out of control them. 2 nights ago, I saw a report that Congress was looking at taking veterans who were so severely disabled they couldn't work and taking away part of their stipend so that they'd have something to live on when they hit 65, replacing that with Medicaid and Medicare and with Social Security. Well, we paid into Social Security just like everyone else. We have the right to that as well. So how do we reverse SCOTUS? We can't impeach and replace them. We have a Congress that refuses to do that. We can't wait till overreaching justices retire or die. We can override decisions via amendments to the current mangled Constitution. We can restore the clarity of original intent in meeting. The original Commerce Clause. The original Commerce Clause was there to settle disputes between states as they arose. If there wasn't a dispute, the Commerce Clause wasn't intended to be enacted. There was nothing for them to do. Now, through the Frank Dodd bill, like I told you earlier, when it's fully implemented, another 2 years from now, they can regulate the price of toothpaste in Walmart. So is Article 5 broad enough? Attempts right now. Now, Article 5 itself is neutral. Anyone can try to get together a group and call for an Article 5 amending convention. In fact, since the beginning of our country, there's been over 400 calls for an Article 5 amending convention. They've just never been able to make it to the required 2/3. Now, of the ones that are going on right now, you've got ones like the Balanced Budget Amendment. It's limited to the topic of the balanced budget only. And as we talked about, the balanced budget is not broad enough. There is Compact for America. They've got kind of a unique pre-qualifying strategy. But clearly that's against the verbiage in Article 5. They're putting the cart before the horse with that one. You propose the amendments then go back to Congress, and then Congress says the mode of ratification. You can't pass an application and ratify it at the same time. So they've got legal problems with that one. And of course, Wolfpack, that's the one that George Soros wants to fund. He wants to reverse Citizens for United. George Soros, by the way, is working fervently against our Article 5 application. You cannot combine these. If you could combine Article 5 calls, we'd have had an Article 5 by now. We'd have had an amending convention. So all the other articles' efforts are too narrow. But this is what our call is. This is where we differentiate ourselves. We are calling to impose fiscal restraints on the federal government. We're calling to limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. And we're calling to limit the terms of offices for its officials and for members of Congress. That includes the Supreme Court and federal judges. They don't need to be sitting there for life. My goodness, Thurgood Marshall, the last few years he sat in the court, spent time in his chambers watching Days of Our Lives. We don't need that kind of age sitting on the Supreme Court. So term limiting them makes sense. Of course, we're not advocating any one particular amendment. What we'd like to do is have the states come together and put their best foot forward, offer amendments that we, within our states, have asked our state legislatures to do. So term limits for Congress and SCOTUS certainly fits within our call. Overriding of SCOTUS decisions by Congress or by the states. Nomination of justices, repealing the 17th Amendment. Let's get states' power back in the federal government. Repealing of the 16th Amendment. That taxation is legalized theft in my view. It's morally wrong and reprehensible. There are other ways to raise the revenues to run our government, especially if they're back to doing only the things the federal government is supposed to do. Caps on federal taxation, and many more. So it certainly is broad enough. And it certainly can protect amendments we already have. Do you realize that on the Second Amendment, we almost lost that? It was a 5-4 decision by the Supreme Court. We came one vote away from losing our Second Amendment rights. Now that's very near and dear to my heart because I happen to manufacture ammunition and sell guns. But even if that weren't true, that is a God-given right to us. And those who understand that our rights come from God understand that in Luke, we were commanded to sell our cloak and buy a sword. We understand that that right didn't come from government. In fact, none of them do. They predated the existence of government. That's what's so important to this fight and so important to that understanding. So with the Second Amendment, or with this Convention of States, we could actually go back and reinvigorate the Second Amendment. Offer an amendment that proposes the right to keep and bear arms not being infringed by anybody.